"Marry me, Miss Lucy," the little boy began, his voice high and serious. "Wait, will you marry me, Miss Lucy?" He corrected himself with a small, polite bow. Lucy was currently pressed against the cold, damp tiles of the restaurant's storage room, her heart hammering against her ribs as the voices of debt collectors echoed in the dining area. She looked down at the tiny, curly-haired boy standing next to a crate of Napa cabbage. Despite the danger outside, she couldn't help but smile, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind his ear. "If I marry you, little prince," she whispered jokingly, "will you make those scary men go away?" The boy's eyes sparkled with an intensity that didn't belong to a 4-year-old. "Yes," he whispered back. "My daddy is the scariest of all. He can fix anything." Lucy giggled softly and tapped her pinky against his, thinking it was just a sweet distraction from a terrifying night. She had no idea that this single, playful promise would drag her directly into the path of Shin Yi, the white-haired, tattooed, dragon of the Seoul underworld and the most feared mafia boss in the country. If you're ready for a story of dangerous love and a family found in the shadows, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Let's begin. Lucy had always been complimented on her elegant posture and refined presence, but tonight she felt like a ghost. She was clearing tables at a small, late-night diner in the heart of Seoul, her lustrous dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, when the bell above the door chimed, not with the sound of a customer, but with the heavy thud of trouble. She recognized the voices immediately. The men her late mother had owed money to for medical treatments. They didn't care about Lucy's grief, they only cared about the interest. "Where is the pretty waitress?" One of them growled, the sound of a chair being kicked over ringing through the quiet restaurant. Lucy didn't wait. She slipped into the back, her breath hitching. She knew the routine. They would harass the manager, break a few glasses, and wait for her to come out and beg for more time. She tucked herself behind a stack of industrial-sized flour bags, her tan skin pale under the dim fluorescent light. She was just about to close her eyes and pray for them to leave when she saw him. A small boy with soft, curly hair and expensive clothes that didn't fit the grime of a kitchen pantry. He was staring at her with wide, curious eyes. "Are you playing hide and seek?" he asked. Lucy pressed a finger to her lips, her eyes darting toward the kitchen door where the shadows of the debt collectors were growing larger. The heavy kitchen door creaked open, but it wasn't the clumsy kick of a debt collector. It was a slow, deliberate movement that commanded the air to go still. Lucy held her breath, her hand resting protectively on Ryu Min's shoulder as a figure stepped into the dim light of the pantry. He looked like a vision from a high-fashion nightmare. His hair was a striking, icy white, styled back with sharp volume that caught the flickering fluorescent light. He was classically handsome, with a jawline that looked carved from marble and high cheekbones that gave him a regal, predatory air. But it was the ink that stole Lucy's breath. Elaborate, traditional tattoos climbed his neck like dark vines and wrapped around his large, capable hands. "Ryu Min," the man said. His voice was a low, resonant velvet that vibrated in Lucy's chest. "Daddy," the little boy broke away from Lucy's side, running toward the man. The mafia boss knelt, his intense, dark eyes softening for a fraction of a second as he caught his son. But as he stood back up, his gaze shifted to Lucy. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her elegant posture and the refined way she held herself even while trembling. "So," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers with a piercing weight, "this is the woman you've chosen to protect." Before Lucy could find her voice, the kitchen doors burst open. The 3 debt collectors stumbled in, their faces red with drunken rage. "There you are, you little." The lead thug stopped mid-sentence. His eyes traveled from Lucy to the white-haired man standing in the center of the grimy kitchen. The air in the room shifted instantly. Shin Yi didn't move a muscle, yet the sheer aura of violence radiating from him made the thugs take a collective step back. "Do you know who I am?" Shin Yi asked quietly. He didn't raise his voice, but the threat was louder than a scream. He adjusted the cuff of his expensive suit, revealing more of the dark, ornamental ink on his wrists. The thugs grew pale. They recognized the tattoos. They recognized the white dragon of the Shin syndicate. Mr. Shin, we didn't know, we were just— You were touching what belongs to my son, Shin Yi interrupted. He took a single step forward, and the debt collectors nearly tripped over their own feet, scrambled to get out. Leave, before I decide your debt is paid in something other than one. They fled, the sound of their frantic footsteps fading into the night. Silence reclaimed the kitchen. Lucy stood slowly, her lustrous dark hair falling over her shoulders as she looked at the man who had just dismantled her nightmares with a single look. You promised, Ryu-min chirped, tugging at his father's hand. You said if I found a wife, you'd keep the bad men away. Shin Yi's intense gaze returned to Lucy. A ghost of a smirk played on his chiseled lips. It seems I have a contract to honor. Pack your things, Lucy. You're coming with us. The black sedan glided through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, its windows tinted so darkly that the neon city lights appeared as nothing more than passing ghosts. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by Ryu-min's soft breathing as he drifted to sleep against Lucy's side. Across from them sat Shin Yi. In the dim glow of the car's interior, his white hair looked like spun silver, and the ornamental tattoos on his hands seemed to move with every shift of his fingers. Lucy stayed pressed against the leather seat, her mind racing. She had expected a luxury apartment, perhaps a penthouse, but as the car began to ascend a private winding road toward the peaks of Nam Mountain, the reality of her situation began to shift. They pulled up to a massive gate that shimmered with an iridescent blue light, a laser grid security system that scanned the vehicle before retracting with a mechanical hum. The mansion was less of a home and more of a high-tech fortress. Sleek obsidian walls rose against the night sky, punctuated by floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass that looked indestructible. We're here, Shin Yi stated, his voice cutting through the quiet. As the doors were opened by men in sharp black suits who bowed in unison, Lucy stepped out, her elegant posture faltering for the first time. The air here was different, cold and smelling of ozone and expensive cologne. Armed guards stood at every corner, their eyes scanning the perimeter with a lethal focus that no ordinary bodyguard possessed. Shin Yi led her through the grand entrance, where the minimalist decor was accented by traditional Korean artifacts and cutting-edge biometric scanners. On a massive monitor in a side room, Lucy caught a glimpse of dozens of camera feeds, not just of the house, but of the city docks and warehouse districts. Your father, he isn't just a businessman, is he? Lucy whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at a collection of ceremonial daggers displayed in the foyer. Shin Yi paused, turning to look at her. The light hit his chiseled features, casting long shadows that made him look like a dark god. He didn't offer a comforting lie. Instead, he stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood and steel enveloping her. Business is a broad term, Lucy, he said, his intense eyes locking onto hers. In this house, I am a father. Outside of it, I am the law. The debt collectors who chased you are nothing compared to the people I deal with. Lucy looked around the sprawling, silent hall. It was beautiful, gilded in gold and marble, but as she heard the heavy thud of the front doors locking behind them, she realized the truth. The pinky promise with a 4-year-old had traded her small, chaotic prison for a vast, glittering cage. She was no longer a waitress in a diner. She was the guest, or perhaps the property of the most dangerous man in Korea. The transition from the gritty streets to the sterile, high-tech silence of the estate had left Ryu-min restless. In the middle of the night, the fortress was woken not by an intruder, but by the heartbreaking sound of a 4-year-old's night terrors. Lucy found him in a bedroom that was too large for a small boy, filled with expensive toys that looked like they had never been played with. He was curled into a ball, sobbing for a mother who had long since vanished from his world. Lucy didn't hesitate. She crossed the room with an effortless grace, her lustrous hair falling like a protective veil as she gathered him into her arms. She didn't offer him a gadget or a security guard. She offered him the warmth of a lullaby she remembered from her own childhood. Her voice, smooth and resonant, filled the cold room, anchoring the boy to the present. Slowly, the tension left his tiny frame, and his frantic sobs turned into rhythmic breathing. In the doorway, hidden by the shadows, Shin Yi watched. He had come prepared to handle a crisis with the clinical efficiency he applied to his empire, but he stopped when he saw her. The sight of Lucy, her tan skin glowing softly under the nightlight, her elegant posture softened by the weight of his son, hit him with a force no rival boss ever could. For years, he had provided Ryu Min with everything money could buy, the best doctors, the tightest security, the rarest gifts. Yet, he had never been able to give him this. He watched as Lucy gently wiped a tear from Ryu Min's cheek, her touch refined and deliberate. She wasn't afraid of the boy's vulnerability, nor was she intimidated by the darkness of the house. He's always been alone. Shin Yi's voice drifted from the doorway, lower and less jagged than usual. Lucy looked up, her dark eyes meeting his intense, chiseled gaze. She didn't flinch at the sight of his white hair or the tattoos that marked him as a dealer of death. "Children don't need fortresses, Shin Yi," she said softly, her voice echoing with a quiet strength. "They need to know someone will catch them when they fall." Shin Yi stepped into the room, his model-like features relaxing into an expression that was almost human. He sat on the edge of the bed, his tattooed hand resting inches from hers. In that moment, the lethal white dragon was gone, replaced by a man who was beginning to realize that the refined waitress he had brought home as a contract might be the only person capable of healing the jagged edges of his family. The cold glass of the fortress felt, for the first time, like it was starting to thaw. The transition from the quiet sanctuary of the nursery to the violent glamour of the Seoul Grand Ballroom was jarring. Lucy stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, smoothed the silk of her deep emerald gown, and took a steadying breath. Her dark, lustrous hair was swept into an intricate crown, highlighting her elegant posture and the refined, calm mask she had learned to wear. Beside her, Shin Yi was a study in lethal perfection. His white hair was slicked back, and his tailored black tuxedo did little to hide the ornamental tattoos that crept up his neck, marking him as the most dangerous man in the room. "Stay close to me," Shin Yi murmured, his voice a low vibration. "The families tonight aren't looking for a waitress, they are looking for a weakness." As they entered the gala, the sea of diamonds and designer suits parted. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive champagne and unspoken threats. Lucy felt 1,000 eyes on her, some curious, others filled with a cold, sharp prejudice. She navigated the room with a grace that surprised even Shin Yi, her medium-tanned skin glowing under the crystal chandeliers as she spoke softly, but firmly to heads of industry and underworld lieutenants alike. She wasn't just a guest. She was the dragon's consort, a role she played with a quiet, steely dignity. The piece lasted only until the main toast. Without warning, the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall were kicked open. 3 men in tactical gear burst in, their faces obscured, drawing weapons before the crowd could even scream. The room erupted into chaos. Champagne flutes shattered, and the elite scrambled for cover. Shin Yi's reaction was instantaneous. He stepped in front of Lucy, his hand reaching for the concealed weapon at his hip, his eyes turning into shards of ice. But the attackers weren't just after him. A secondary group moved toward the flank, aiming to cut off their exit. In the heat of the moment, Lucy's fear didn't paralyze her. She saw a waiter trembling near a heavy marble pedestal, caught in the line of fire. Risking herself, Lucy reached out, pulling the young man behind a reinforced pillar just as a bullet chipped the stone where he had been standing. She didn't scream. She didn't hide. Instead, she locked eyes with Shin Yi across the smoky room, nodding once to signal she was safe. Seeing her resolve, Shin Yi's movements became a blur of silver and shadow. He neutralized the nearest threat with a brutal, polished efficiency, his tattooed hands moving with a speed that left the room breathless. Within minutes, the estate's security team swarmed the hall, and the threat was contained. As the dust settled, the remaining guests looked at Lucy with a new kind of fear and a burgeoning respect. She stood amidst the wreckage, her dress unsullied and her head held high. She had survived her first baptism of fire. Shin Yi approached her, wiping a stray drop of blood from his cheek. He didn't speak, but the way he draped his jacket over her shoulders told her everything. She was no longer just a contract for his son, she was becoming the heartbeat of his empire. "Would you like me to continue with the next chapter, where Shin Yi reveals the story behind his tattoos?" The adrenaline from the gala had long since faded, leaving behind a heavy, electric silence that settled over the estate. Lucy stood on the balcony of the master's suite, her emerald gown replaced by a soft silk robe, looking out at the sprawling lights of Seoul. The door behind her opened, and the scent of sandalwood and rain announced Shin Yi's arrival. He had discarded his tuxedo jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and sleeves rolled up, revealing the full complexity of the ink that claimed his skin. "You didn't run," he remarked, his voice a low, gravelly caress. He stepped beside her, his chiseled profile sharp against the moonlight. "I've spent my life running, Shin Yi," Lucy replied, her eyes fixed on the ornamental designs trailing down his neck. "I'm tired of being afraid of things I don't understand." She reached out, her fingers hovering tentatively over the ink on his forearm. "What do they mean? They aren't just for show." Shin Yi looked down at his hands, his expression unreadable. "In my world, every mark is a debt, a loss, or a vow. This," he said, pointing to the dragon that spiraled around his wrist and onto his palm, "is the weight of the Shin name. It's a reminder that my hands are never truly clean." He moved her hand to the base of his neck, where the patterns were most intricate. "And these are for the family I've had to bury to keep Ryu Min safe. They are the armor I wear so he never has to." Lucy felt the warmth of his skin and the slight texture of the ink beneath her fingertips. She didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, her refined presence meeting his raw intensity. "You carry so much alone," she whispered. Shin Yi's gaze softened, the shards of ice in his eyes melting into something deep and burning. He placed his hand over hers, his tattooed fingers interlocking with her smooth, tan ones. For a man who ruled with iron and blood, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "I thought I had to," he murmured, "until a waitress made a promise to a boy she didn't know." The distance between them vanished. When he kissed her, it wasn't the cold, calculated move of a mafia boss, but the desperate hunger of a man who had finally found a sanctuary. It was a slow, searing collision of two different worlds, the darkness of his past meeting the lustrous light of her spirit. In the quiet of the fortress, the contract was forgotten. As his hands tangled in her dark hair, Lucy realized that she wasn't just a guest in his cage anymore. She was the one who held the key to his heart. The sanctuary of the master suite felt like a distant memory the following morning when Lucy was summoned to the Grand Council chamber. The room was a cold expanse of polished obsidian and steel, occupied by the Shadow Council, Shin Yi's highest-ranking lieutenants. These were men who had built the empire on blood, and as Lucy entered, their silence was sharper than any blade. Shin Yi was absent, delayed by a sudden emergency at the docks, leaving Lucy alone before the council. The eldest member, a man with a scarred face and eyes like flint, threw a folder onto the table. It contained photos of Lucy from the gala, along with her bank records and the history of her mother's debts. "The white dragon is blinded by a pretty face," the elder spat, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "A foreign waitress with a trail of debt collectors is a liability we cannot afford. You are a stain on the Shin legacy, and we have decided to remove you." Lucy's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't let her elegant posture slip. She met the elder's gaze with a refined calm that seemed to irritate him further. "I am here because Ryu Min chose me," she said, her voice steady, "and because Shin Yi keeps his promises." The elder laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think he brought you here for love? You are nothing but a tether. We leaked your location to the rival clans weeks ago. You were the bait to draw them out, to force a confrontation we've been waiting for. Shin Yi didn't bring you here to save you. He brought you here to be a target." The revelation hit Lucy like a physical blow. The tenderness of the previous night, the sharing of his secrets, was it all a calculated play to keep the bait in place? She looked around the room, seeing the cold, expectant faces of the rebels. They weren't just insulting her. They were moving to seize control, using her presence as the excuse to claim Shin Yi had grown weak. Before they could move toward her, a red light began to pulse against the obsidian walls. The fortress's high-tech lockdown system had been triggered. The elder's face paled as a voice boomed over the intercom. It wasn't Shin Yi, but a distorted, mocking tone Lucy didn't recognize. "The bait has worked too well," the voice crackled. "The dragon is trapped at the docks, and the gates are open for us." Lucy realized with a sickening jolt that the internal betrayal was deeper than she thought. The council hadn't just tried to oust her, they had signaled the rival boss. She was indeed bait, but the trap was closing on everyone inside the house. The sirens of the estate were silenced not by a reset, but by the concussive blast of the north gate detonating. The internal betrayal had left the fortress's digital veins severed, and through the smoke stepped the nightmare the council had invited. Chairman Kang, Shin Yi's most sadistic rival. Before Lucy could retreat, the Grand Council chamber was flooded with men in gray tactical gear. The treacherous elders were cut down where they sat, a grim reminder that traitors are rarely rewarded by those they help. Lucy felt a rough hand seize her arm, the grip bruising her skin, while another man emerged from the hallway hauling a terrified, crying Ryu Min. "So this is the dragon's treasure," Kang mused, his voice like grinding stones. He reached out to touch Lucy's face, but she recoiled, her elegant posture sharpening into a defensive stance even as a rifle was leveled at her chest. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Hours later, the world was reduced to the smell of damp earth and rotting wood. They had been thrown into a cellar beneath an abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of Incheon. The only light came from a single, flickering bulb hanging from a rusted wire. Ryu Min was hyperventilating, his small frame shaking so violently that his teeth rattled. "Lucy, I'm scared. Is Daddy coming?" he whispered, his voice cracking. Lucy pulled him into her lap, ignoring the dampness of the floor against her silk robe. She pressed his head to her chest, masking the frantic racing of her own heart. She knew now that she had been bait, but as she looked at the innocent boy in her arms, the hurt of Shin Yi's potential deception was eclipsed by a fierce maternal rage. "Listen to me, Ryu Min," she whispered, her voice a refined anchor in the dark. "We are playing a new game. It's called the Silent Nights. We have to be very quiet and very brave so your father can find our signal." She began to hum the same lullaby from the nursery, her steady rhythm acting as a shield against the muffled shouts of the gunmen guarding the door above. When a rat scurried across the floor, Lucy didn't flinch. She simply moved her foot to block the boy's view. She felt the weight of the contract changing. She wasn't just a waitress or a pawn anymore. Looking at the heavy iron door, Lucy felt a cold, polished resolve take root. If Shin Yi had used her as a target, she would survive long enough to make him answer for it. But first, she would ensure that not a single hair on his son's head was touched. In the darkness of the cellar, the refined waitress died, and the syndicate's matriarch began to wake. The silence of the cellar was shattered not by a key in the lock, but by the roar of an engine and the thunderous vibration of a heavy-caliber rifle tearing through the floorboards above. The ceiling groaned as dust and debris rained down on Lucy and Ryu Min outside. The city was burning. Shin Yi had unleashed the full, unbridled fury of the Shin Syndicate, leveling every warehouse and front owned by Chairman Kang in a systematic search that had turned the Incheon docks into a war zone. The cellar door was kicked open, and Chairman Kang stumbled in, his polished face smeared with soot and sweat. He was frantic, his eyes darting like a trapped animal's. He reached for Ryu Min, his hand trembling as he aimed a pistol at the boy's head. "If I'm going to hell today, I'm taking the dragon's blood with me," he shrieked. In that instant, Lucy's refined restraint snapped. She didn't wait for a hero. As Kang stepped closer, Lucy lunged with a ferocity that defied her elegant frame. She drove her shoulder into his midsection, her hands clawing for the weapon. They crashed against the damp stone wall, the gun firing a stray shot into the ceiling. Despite the bruise forming on her temple and the exhaustion in her limbs, Lucy fought like a woman possessed. She bit, she kicked, and finally she slammed her palm upward into Kang's nose with the same precision she once used to balance a tray, feeling the bones shatter. Kang collapsed, howling, just as the wall of the cellar was breached by a black-armored SUV. Shin Yi stepped out of the wreckage before the tires had even stopped spinning. He looked like death incarnate. His white hair was disheveled, his shirt was crimson-stained, and his dark eyes were voids of lethal intent. Behind him, dozens of armed men flooded the space, but they stopped at the perimeter of his rage. Xin Yi's gaze fell on Lucy, who stood over the groveling rival boss, her breathing ragged, her lustrous hair wild and tangled. She held a heavy metal pipe she had scavenged from the floor, her stance protective and unbreakable. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a warrior who had held the line. "Ryu-min is safe," she gasped out, her voice raw. Xin Yi didn't look at Kang. He walked straight to Lucy, his tattooed hands shaking as he reached out to cup her face. For the first time, the white dragon looked terrified, not of the bullets or the betrayal, but of the thought of a world without her. "I didn't use you," he whispered, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that stunned his men. "I moved heaven and earth because you are the only thing that makes this life worth living." Lucy looked into his intense eyes and saw the truth. She let the pipe clatter to the ground, her strength finally giving way as she collapsed into his arms, the scent of sandalwood and smoke finally meaning home. The scars on the city were still healing when the gates of the Shin estate opened for a celebration that Seoul would never forget. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and cherry blossoms, a stark contrast to the smell of gunpowder that had lingered only weeks before. This was not just a wedding, it was a coronation. Lucy stood before the ornate mirror one last time, her elegant posture radiating a new kind of power. She wore a gown that was a masterpiece of fusion, a traditional white silk bodice that flowed into a vibrant train adorned with hand-woven African geometric patterns in gold and emerald. Her lustrous dark hair was styled in a regal updo, woven with delicate pearls and small, silver dragon pins, a gift from the Shin elders who had survived the purge and now bowed to her. Ryu-min, looking dapper in a miniature black tuxedo, bounced on his heels beside her. "You look like a real queen, Lucy," he whispered, his curly hair smelling of lemon water. "And you," she said, kneeling to straighten his bow tie, "look like the bravest knight in Korea." As the heavy oak doors of the grand hall opened, the music, a haunting blend of traditional Korean gyeogeum and soulful cello, swelled. Lucy walked down the aisle, her medium-tanned skin glowing against the white silk. The room was filled with the elite of the underworld and the giants of industry, all standing in a silence that was finally born of respect rather than fear. At the altar stood Xin Yi. He was breathtaking in a deep charcoal hanbok-inspired suit, his white hair styled to perfection. The ornamental tattoos on his neck and hands were visible, but today they didn't look like warnings. They looked like history. As Lucy reached him, he didn't wait for the officiant's prompt. He reached out and took her hands, his intense eyes shimmering with a rare, crystalline warmth. The ceremony was a tapestry of their lives. They exchanged vows in both English and Korean, their voices steady and clear. They performed the traditional bowing ritual to honor the ancestors, followed by a symbolic jumping of the broom to honor Lucy's roots, a moment that brought a burst of joyful laughter from the audience. When it came time to exchange the rings, Ryu-min stepped forward with a cushion. But before the gold bands were placed, Xin Yi took a small, braided cord of green and gold silk. He wrapped it around their joined hands, tying the knot himself. "I promised you a fortress," Xin Yi said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "But you gave me a home. I am yours in this life and everyone that follows." As they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the white dragon and his queen, the room erupted. It was the sound of an empire beginning a new chapter, one built not just on blood and ink, but on a pinky promise and a love that had survived the dark. 1 year later, the fortress on Nam Mountain no longer felt like a cage of obsidian and glass. It felt like a sanctuary. The high-tech security grids remained, but the cold ozone scent of the halls had been replaced by the aroma of home-cooked soul food and the constant, joyful pitter-patter of a child's footsteps. Lucy stood in the sprawling garden, her elegant posture relaxed as she watched Ryu-min chase a golden retriever through the cherry blossom trees. Her dark, lustrous hair caught the afternoon sun, and on her finger, the emerald and diamond band caught the light. She was no longer just a survivor. She was the architect of a new kind of legacy. Under her influence, the Shin Syndicate had shifted its focus, moving away from the jagged edges of the underworld and into legitimate global logistics and philanthropy. a pair of strong, tattooed arms wrapped around her waist from behind. She didn't need to turn to know the scent of sandalwood. Shin Yi rested his chin on her shoulder, his white hair ruffling in the breeze. "You're thinking too loud again," he murmured, his voice a low, contented hum. "I was just thinking about the restaurant," Lucy admitted, leaning back into his solid chest. "About how a tiny pinky promise changed the entire map of Seoul." Shin Yi turned her in his arms, his intense eyes searching hers. The chiseled hardness of his face had softened over the months, the dragon finally finding a reason to rest. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a refined gentleness. "It didn't just change the map, Lucy," he said, his gaze dropping to her stomach, where the faint curve of a new life was just beginning to show. "It saved a family that didn't know it was lost." Ryu Min skidded to a halt in front of them, panting and grinning. "Daddy, Lucy, look!" He held up a small, shimmering stone he'd found in the garden. "It's a dragon's scale. I'm going to use it to protect the new baby." Shin Yi laughed, a sound that was once rare but now filled the estate daily. He picked up his son, settling him on his hip while keeping his other arm firmly around Lucy. As the sun began to set over the city, casting a golden glow over the three of them, the white dragon looked out at his empire. For the first time in his life, he wasn't looking for enemies on the horizon. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The contract was long since fulfilled, but the promise, the real one, was just beginning. What an incredible journey. From a playful pinky promise in a dusty kitchen to the throne of Korea's most powerful syndicate, Lucy and Shin Yi have proven that love can grow even in the deepest shadows. But as we saw, the life of a mafia queen is never truly quiet, and young Ryu Min is already showing signs of the dragon's spirit. Now I want to hear from you. Was Shin Yi right to use Lucy as bait, or did his love justify the danger? And more importantly, do you want to see what happens next as Ryu Min grows up in this dangerous world? Would you love a part 2 of this story? Drop a comment below with the word dragon if you want to see the sequel, and let us know your thoughts on Lucy's transformation. Your comments and theories mean the world to us and help the channel grow. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story. Until next time, keep dreaming big and watching out for those little promises.